we had a good gathering. They're great boys, and after our training at Honeybourne, we moved on to a conversion unit at Croft. We converted from Whitley's to Halifax's. And then at Croft, after our familiarization with the Halifaxes, we moved on to the Squadron 419, Moose Squadron, at Middleton St. George, which is near Darlington. There were two squadrons on that station. There was the 428 Squadron, which I believe was called the Ghost Squadron, and our Moose Squadron. Our commanding officer at the time was Wing Commander Mervyn Fleming. Great guy. And the commanding officer of the other squadron, 428, was a chap by the name of Don Smith. Don happened to be from my same locality in Preston, Ontario. Don had gone to Europe in, I believe, 1937, and he enlisted in the RAF, and therefore he had a lot of experience in the Air Force, and it was quite interesting to note that Don happened to be from my hometown. However, that's the way I thought it was great. We had several flights. We all our flights were night flights. We had bombed Hanover a couple of times, Berlin a couple of times, Cologne, a few other areas, and on our 16th flight, we were scheduled to go to Frankfurt. We arrived at Frankfurt, successfully, we believe, bombed Frankfurt, and on the way out of Frankfurt, we were caught in the flak stream, the searchlights, and we were really in a rough way. We did a lot of evading, and finally we were hit several times, and our port engine and the port wing was hit, and we lost the flight, or at least lost height, and the pilot had difficulty trying to control it. Anyway, we struggled out of the bombing area, or the target area, and on our way out, we were losing a lot of height. We lost quite a descent, and we were picked up by a fighter, and fighter pilot downed us, and we were shot down over in Belgium. The last thing I remember is the pilot ordered us to evacuate, or to escape, and I can remember putting my parachute on, but I do not remember a thing after that until I came to in the middle of the air, landed in the woods, and I found out I landed in the woods it was about 2:30 in the morning, and I could hear dogs barking, so I figured I wasn't too far in the woods. However, I stayed right where I was landed in the woods with my parachute, and I found that I had lost my flying boots on the descent. So as soon as at sunrise the next morning, I decided I needed medical treatment because I had done a few things, escaped scrapes and what have you, and I came upon a path in the woods, and after walking in that area, I was heading west, because I knew which way west was as well as east. I was heading and I came upon two chaps that were walking in the same path toward me. And I felt, well, this is it. I need medical treatment. I need something. I was without flying boots, without shoes. I couldn't get very far without shoes. So as soon as they saw me, they said, La Royal Air Force, comrade. Well, I wasn't sure whether I was still in France or whether I was in Belgium. But the language, I had taken French in school, but I was not very familiar with it. But anyway, I learned that I was in Belgium, in Belgique. And the one fella said, le doctor. So he looked at me. I guess I cut myself in quite a lot of things. Anyway, he went to get a doctor. He said, restez ici avec lui. That's stay here with him. So I stayed here with the one guy, and the other fellow went to get a doctor. About 2 hours later, thereabouts, a doctor arrived on the scene, and he did some medical treatment to me, got straightened me around a bit. Anyway, he said he couldn't speak English, he spoke French, but he said, restez ici aujourd'hui et je retourne ce soir. I'll stay here today, I'll come back tonight. He's avec un père qui parle anglais, with a priest who speaks English. So I was in the woods for the day with these two fellows, smiling at each other. And they had, I never forget, they had their lunch, they had applesauce sandwiches which were about 2 inches thick, and they wanted me to eat these applesauce sandwiches with them. Well, I did not feel like eating at all, believe me. I was shaken up a fair bit. And anyway, to make them happy, when the priest come back, the fellow with him brought me a pair of felt slippers and a coveralls to cover my uniform so that I would not be seen that way. Anyway, I endured the day with them, and then about sunset, this doctor returned with a priest. This priest had a white cassock on, and he spoke English. He had just returned a year or so ago. He was living in the Congo as a missionary, and that's where he learned his English. However, he told me that everything would be all right, that he would take me to another home in the village, not too far, and that I'd be safe there. So the doctor, between the intermediate and myself, we got along quite well. However, I ended up in this home in another village, which was about 8 or 10 kilometers away. Fortunately, the doctor had a car, so the three of us went in the car to this home. On arrival at this home, this was another priest who was in the village of La Nef. La Nef was a small village, and in there, this priest was harboring 2 Russian army people that had escaped from the coal mines of Charleroi, which was not too distant from La Nef. These 2 Russians were there hiding in the home with the priest. So the doctor put me to bed, and I was in bed for 2 weeks, and while I was in there, I just couldn't eat the food that they had. It was just horrible. Anyway, for about 2 days, I didn't eat a thing, and the doctor said to me, look at you, gotta live. You gotta eat to live. The Russians used to eat all my food, So we were there for a while, and then they got me a false passport. My name was now Willie Leon Revel. my right name was Wilfred Louis Renner. Willie Leon Ravel, and I was a cordonnier. I was a shoemaker. And here I was without any shoes. So, to make a long story short, the priest said, he was a real brave guy. He said, come on, when I was able to get out, he said, come on, we're going to get you some shoes. So we went into the city of Charleroi, which is about, I don't know, about 25 miles away, 25 kilometers away. And we went into this shoe store, and they were friends of this priest. And we went up to his apartment upstairs in the shoe store, and there were 3 German soldiers down in the bottom there at the shoe store, and the priest used to keep saying to me, come on here, look at these guys in here, look at these guys. Do you want them? Do you want to talk to them? I said, no, I don't want to talk to them. Anyway, we got our shoes, and we were able to come home. I rode on a motorbike that he had into the city. And I'm riding on a motorbike after being in bed for a couple of weeks on the cobblestones. My kidneys were all shook up, and I just had a horrible time for about 3 days after that. Anyway, I was there for just a little over, about 3 or 4 weeks. And one night the doctor came in and he said, we have to leave immediately. The priest used to bring people up to see me all the time. They'd never seen a Canadian airman before. So I was a novelty to them, I guess. And he was proud to have me in this and that. So anyway, the doctor came in and he said, the Gestapo are in the area. I understand they're searching the homes. And he said, we have to get out of here right away. So I got out. The 2 Russians got out. And then a Franciscan brother who was in the underground and was a courier. He used to cover all the area for supplies for his order, for the Franciscan order. This Franciscan took me on a bicycle. I rode. There were 2 of us on the one bicycle. We rode about 3 kilometers to another home, and this was the home of the doctor's aunt. Well, the doctor's aunt was too frightened to have me there, so I was there for one night, and then I moved on to another home, another farm, I guess about a mile away, and then finally in November the 4th, I believe it was, I ended up on another in a home called Ferrol, which was a little village on the way out of Charleroi, and this village had they had a farm on the one side of the street with a home in it, and they had another big home across the street, where there was a lady there by the name of Maria Dardenne. Maria Dardenne was a young lady. She was 40 at the time. She and her father lived there. Her father was 84, and her father was a patriot, of course, as she was, but they did not want him to know that she was harboring an ally. However, I went into this home, and she refused to take any remuneration from the underground for her assistance to me. Her brother was in the Belgian army in the First World War, and he was sent home with gangrene, and she saw him dying at her home, and she was a little girl, and she was resolved that she was going to do everything she could to get rid of the Boche. The Boche were the Germans, the Boche. Yeah. However, and her brother was Joseph Dardenne. He lived across the street with his wife on the farm. And they had a system arranged there whereby they had a bell in the farm and a bell in this home across the street. And if there was any emergency, they would ring the bell in the farm and alert anyone that was in the other home. Prior to my arrival at this home, they had an RAF pilot who was there for a couple of weeks, and then he was transferred by the underground, and en route for his transfer from the Dardenne family, he was picked up, and the courier was picked up. They killed the courier, and this RAF boy was put into a prisoner of war camp. However, things were quite tight at that time. There was not too much movement along the way, and the underground decided if you're in there, you had to stay where they told you to do it. Anyway, I spent some time in that home, and the the brother across the street, he would get supplies and they'd bring them across, and the underground people would come in and visit with me. And this lady, she was such a heroine. I have a big picture of her on my wall, and the kids all say, "Who's that? Who's that?" They knew who it was because I worshipped her. She had a lot of bravery about her. Anyway, I was in this home from November the 4th until April the 5th or 6th through the winter months. And while I was in that home, one of the ladies in the underground brought me a book on the complete works of William Shakespeare. Well, I wasn't interested in reading William Shakespeare, but anyway, it was in English, and this woman had studied in England prior to the war, and that was one of her keepsakes, was the complete works of William. Anyway, I learned about William Shakespeare during my sojourn there, and periodically I would be able to go out after dark. The lady would walk me up and down the road or whatever was available, or over to the farmhouse. And I was there in this home for about until February. Yeah, and then another Canadian airman by the name of Norman Mickey from Winnipeg. Norm was shot down in Holland. He was moving on through the underground, and he met a stalemate in our area, so he had to stop at our place. And Norm and I, we used to kibitz back and forth, and at night, periodically, we would be able to go out, and in the same area, same village, was a vicar. A vicar was a priest who looked after a small parish in the village of Farrell, and he harbored an RAF and an American airman. They were shot down. So we would get together and periodically and kibitz, the four of us, Norm Mickey and Charlie Warren from the States and Alan Lucas from England and myself. We would get together, and the priest would often find a bottle of wine that he had stashed away somewhere, and we'd have some great talks between the four of us with a bottle of wine, and of course we share it with the priest. Anyway, we had quite a time there, and then finally we went out into the woods as soon as the weather broke, and things were really getting tight. The Americans, this was in 44, in April 44. So we went into the woods. The woods was about 30 30 kilometers away from where we were. And we walked down in there in the night. We got down there, and lo and behold, the underground had set up a camp or huts in this various area. And we had 2 Yugoslavians that were escaped from the coal mines of Charleroi. They were hiding in one area, and we had 2 Russian Yugoslavs, or 2 Russian army guys that were also taken into the underground. They were hiding in the other areas. So when we got together, there was the 2 Russians and the American and the RAF that were hiding. We all got together. So it ended up there were 7 of us. We slept on a bunk that we had made up, or they had made up, of branches of trees and old parachutes. Where they got them, Lord knows, but they had straw and old parachutes, and we slept on silk parachutes. Imagine in the woods. It was interesting at that time. We had wild boars to come around once in a while, and we had rats. Those were the things that were the real problem for us at that time. Anyway, we had 4 Sten guns among the 7 of us, and the underground would bring us food in periodically every other day, whatever food they were able to get, and it was a survival of the fittest, I guess. Anyway, we were able to cope with things fairly well. The garde champêtre is a guard that looks after the forests in Belgium, and he was a patriot. So he would advise us if there was any danger coming in. We were right in the middle of the woods, and he would advise us if there was any danger coming around. Now, we were only 4 kilometers from Florennes, and Florennes was an Air Force base for fighters, for F-190s. And naturally, we'd see them coming overhead, but we had to be very careful that we concealed our identity and concealed our location there. So during the time that we were there, we had 2 messages from the underground. Were advised that there were 2 messages that were to be used by the BBC in dropping supplies to our area. The 2 messages were La Carpe vide, the carpe est mute, that's the carp is deaf or quiet, and le buffet est vide, the buffet is empty. This is a plaque that was erected in the city of Walcourt in Belgium to commemorate the droppage of supplies by the British, the Royal Air Force, and we had 2 messages to know whether we were going to have supplies dropped that evening. We had a little radio that the BBC had dropped elsewhere and was in the Belgian underground. And as soon as we heard that every day at 12 noon, the BBC would announce where supplies were being driven and different messages to the underground. And the 2 messages that we had were La Carpe est mute and the buffet est vide. When we heard one of those messages, either of those messages, we found out that they were going to drop supplies to us that evening. We had 3 such supplies dropped to us during my term in the underground, And they would, we had a field called Erpion, which was just at the outskirts of the woods. And we would have to identify the aircraft because we were not far from a fighter drome at Florennes. And what we did, we had 6 searchlights, spotlights, and we would line up along the field, and as soon as we identified the proper aircraft, we would turn the lights on to show which direction in which to drop their supplies. We'd have those on for just a couple seconds until they identified us, and they'd make a run and they'd drop the supplies to us. As soon as they come in, we would all go out there. The underground and all our group that was in the front here, the evaders, we would have the supplies dropped to us by parachute, and then we'd take all the canisters and hide them in the woods. And then after in a couple of days or in a day or so, the Belgian underground would have a truck come into the certain area, and we would lug all these supplies, and they were all dressed as gendarmes. But they come in the truck, and they would pick them up. Now, before that, what we did, we used to open the containers naturally to make sure that everything was all right, and to check for cigarettes and chocolate bars, which we rifled. The boys always enjoyed a cigarette or two. We had the senior service cigarettes that came in the containers, and we would rifle those away. But the supplies were mostly Sten guns and ammunition and some medical supplies. But it was very interesting how they operated, how the Belgians were able to take care of these supplies and maneuver them around. They would either take them into Brussels or into Charleroi, somewhere area like that. But these transporters, these are the fellows down on the bottom of the plaque. These were all the fellows that transported all the material. This plaque shows also all the people that worked in the underground. This was the chief of the underground. His name was Desiree Crowan. Desiree was a railway dispatcher. He worked on the railway in the dispatch office of the city of Walcourt. And his wife and his daughter and his son-in-law were all members of our underground. They're all shown in the pictures here. They were great people. The Franciscan brother that transported me from one place to the other, he's in here. He used to travel by bicycle and deliver messages for the underground into northern France, and he would drive maybe 50 kilometers in a day and ride by night. And he ended up, he was wanted by the Gestapo, so they made him take his Franciscan uniform off, and he was dressed as a civilian. He grew a mustache and wore glasses. We used to call him Mr. Joe from Washington. He was a humorous guy, but he loved a bottle of wine. And at the farm where I was hiding, at the Dardenne farm, they had buried a lot of their wines because of the Germans coming through. They had buried them, and they were able to get some wine back periodically. And the odd time, they would come out with a bottle of wine, which was all cobwebbed and dirty and everything else, but we would sit and sip wine with Franciscan brother or with the chief of the underground. And those were the pleasant times for me as a kid. It was something different. Anyway, after I guess so September the 7th, we were liberated. The Americans were coming through, and we got into their line, and then we all broke up camp, and then went back to we went back to the farmhouse. Norm Mickey and I, who was from Winnipeg, Norm and I went back to the farm where we started their trip, and then we celebrated with the Belgians for 2 days. We ended up back in Brussels, where we were given army uniforms. We were interrogated, and then we flew back to England. We spent a week in what they call a house arrest, I guess is what you call it. We were kept there for that while, and then we were released, and then went on through to Warrington, and then back home. When I got back to Canada, my parents, of course, were advised that I was reported missing, and after 6 months that I was presumed dead. My mother always had a feeling that I was still alive, and the 6 members of my crew, which I did not mention prior to my talk, they were all killed, and they were all buried in a cemetery in Gosselies, which is a suburb of Charleroi. The flight engineer was burned beyond recognition. 3 of them were found in the aircraft. 3 were found within the very close perimetry of the aircraft that crashed. And the flight engineer was unrecognized. So they listed him as an unknown. And they weren't sure, because I was not there, they weren't sure whether it was he or myself who was the unrecognized. So my mother and father, of course, they were advised that I was presumed dead. And then in September 17th, when I got back to England, they advised my parents that I was safe and alive, and that I was the one that was alive. So the graves were marked in the cemetery as an unknown flyer for Cyril Winterbottom. However, since then they've completely changed the markings, and they've given them very nice plaques, and it was quite impressive after I'd seen them the first time.